again. Today I'm going to talk about Quatermass films that were made by Hammer in the 50s and 60s. I'm also going to cover Quatermass Conclusion, which was made by ITV Euston Films in the 70s. It was made as a film and a TV show at the same time, and the longer version was a TV show and the short version was a film. So I'll talk about the film. So I'm just talking about the films. I'm also going to cover briefly X the Unknown and the Abominable Snowman, which were both linked to the Quatermass films in different ways. Like X the Unknown, the Hammer film, which they were trying to make it a sequel to Quatermass, and Nigel Deal said, "No, you're not using my character for that." And Abominable Snowman was an adaptation of the BBC plays that Neil had written. And it was from the same director as the first two Quatermass films, Val Guest. So that's kind of linked too. Originally, the Quatermass series were three different series over the mid to late 50s. Quatermass Experiment, Quatermass 2, Quatermass and Pit, all made by the BBC. Different actors playing Quatermass in each one. Because the actor who played Quatermass originally died. So he was going to be in Quatermass 2 and he died, so they would replaced him. The guy they replaced him with was not viewed as a good Quatermass, so when they came to Quatermass in the Pit, they did got Andrew Morell to play Quatermass, and he was a very good Quatermass. Then those were massive successes in the BBC, as was Abominable Snowman, which was made at the same time, written by Nigel Neal, done as a play on British TV. All four of those were bought by Hammer and adapted. The first two Quatermasses in Abominable Snowman were written by Val Guest. Nigel Neal wrote the scripts, Abominable Snowman script and Quatermass 2. It was adapted. Quatermass Experiment was adapted by others, by Val Guest, I think, and but they were viewed as good versions of the film. So that's the history. It's all complicated because it was going from BBC to Hammer. Nigel Neal was not happy with the deal because he didn't get any money from it, but he ended up getting money for writing the scripts eventually. The BBC didn't have a clue about this stuff in the 50s. They're just selling stuff off to make money, and it was like, sell this stuff off to make money, and who cares about the rights for the writer? So we first have the Quatermass Experiment, which was essentially the same story as the Quatermass Experiment TV, but just cut down and just put together. So what was a 3-hour story became an hour and a half. You had a different Quatermass. You had Brian Dunleavy, who was an American actor who played various parts, people like Preston Sturges. At this point, he was a bit of a drinker, so he was brought over to Britain to be the star of this thing because it was a co-production between Hammer and some Americans, and who, for their investment, they wanted an American star in it. It was something that happened a lot in this time, but eventually Hammer would become so identified as British that you didn't need to do that anymore with the Hammer films. But that's early on, before they did Dracula and Frankenstein. They needed an American star, so you got Dunleavy, who Nigel Neal hated as Quatermass. They thought he was just a big brute, and he's not. He does lack the imagination you get from like an Andrew Morell on TV or Andrew Kerr from Quatermass and Pit. He's not as good as those as Quatermass. He really is not. He's not as good as the guy who played Quatermass in the TV show. There's 2 episodes still available, and he was much more interesting in Quatermass. But he's not actually that bad. He's enjoyable. It's just that you have to see this is a very kind of British version of this character who seems to lack the humanity, but he is a funny character and he is a dark, brutal character who gets things done. But he is kind of like a guy who will steamroll through scenes, talk really fast and steamroll through the scenes to get to the point. He doesn't have charm, which means that you don't know who would ever follow him and who would ever follow his ideals. Like, he doesn't quite seem to be the guy who would. It seems like the guy who would engineer the space program, but he would not be the guy who would imagine it. And Quatermass is meant to be the guy who imagines things and works with a team to get things done. And this, it's like, I don't see him imagining things like this. But it's one of those things like, that's what they're going with. And for the services of this plot, I'll go with it. Because There are better Quatermass in the future, and the film still works. It's just a problem for the film is that it doesn't seem to be that imaginative for a character who's meant to have a lot of imagination and a lot of, empathy for people, and he's just a total dick throughout the film. But it is enjoyable in its own way. It just doesn't fit in with the other portrayals in the script. But that's not the strength of this film. This is a wonderful film, but the strength is in the ideas. And the ideas are wonderful. Basically, this was one of the films I saw as a teenager, and it blew my mind because it's so wonderfully inventive. The idea is the rocket ship goes up. There's 3 guys on the rocket ship. There's no way for them to leave the ship. It's a scientific experiment for the rocket ship to get up and then down again. There's no way to leave. Everyone's locked in. And all the readings tell them that the door was not opened. So no one left. 3 astronauts went up. 1 came back down. And it's like, okay, what happened to the other 2 guys? Like, did he kill them? How did he get rid of the bodies? What the hell happened here? And there was lots of explanations, and there's lots of more interesting things that happen in the TV show about the explanation of how the only one come back. It's simplified in the film to make a monster movie. But essentially, the story is all 3 of the bodies are because of the thing they go through something in space. It's dangerous. This organism in space is dangerous. It goes into the ship, and the bodies get fused into one. So the person's got strange fingerprints, and he's just a bit off. And it's a great performance by the actor playing him, who's very skinny and very haunted. And he's starting to mutate, and his hand gets hit in a plant, and the plant becomes more plant-like as it absorbs what it touches and absorbs people and takes the life energy from people. And this was the 50s, this was before this thing really became a sci-fi cliche. This was just a horrific idea. And this was the thing that everyone ripped off, basically. But it was more complicated than the TV show, because it was about the idea of personalities all spinning in his head. Like, it's not just one person, it's 3 people in one body, and the body's mutating. And this is just like, the other 2 things are burnt up, and he was a survivor and he's mutating. It's more simple, but it's less interesting. But the idea is, his wife gets him out of the hospital he's staying in because they're still doing tests. He goes on a run, he starts mutating, they have to try and find him and stop him from mutating and becoming this massive creature that will engulf London and cause havoc as the mutation goes out of control. And yeah, you've probably seen this kind of thing ripped off, but this is the original and it is so well done. It's done like very documentary style, so it's more realistic. It feels there's a lot of interactions with people on the streets and then people in their working lives that make it more interesting. Val Guest likes to do comedy, so there's a couple of comedy things that are a bit forced. But he was on a run at this time. He was doing the Quatermass stuff. He did Yesterday's Enemy. He did Camp Blood Island. He did the D-Death Caught Fire. He was doing a lot of really interesting, cool stuff at this time. And he'd go and do some more Hammer stuff. And he'd do the When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth, which was the best of those films as well. So he's a director that had a good run in the 50s and 60s. I mean, some of the later stuff on the TV was not so good, but he was in a good run for a while. And he gives this film a lot of real, virtues by just pacing and getting the actors to do a decent job, apart from the lead actress, who's terrible. But it's just like, he just tries to push through that as quickly as possible. But the idea's imaginative, the settings are imaginative, everything's done really well. And it is just a really well-made film. Even though there's more in the story. And the ending's wrong, because the ending, they just blow up the creature. And the original ending was Quatermass has to convince the creature that it's a danger to the world, and it has to commit suicide to save the world. So it's a actual philosophical argument he makes to the creature in the original TV show. In this one, it is blow up as a monster. And there are some dodgy effects involved here as well, because it's a low budget film. But it's still a really well made film. The star is the lead actor who plays the infected man, whose name I cannot remember, unfortunately. But it's wonderful. It's a wonderful adaptation. Even though they get certain things wrong, it's still such a strong film. The idea is so strong that even mistakes it makes doesn't matter ultimately. Quatermass 2 is a lesser film than the Quatermass Experiment. It's based in a follow-up, a sequel plot, which wasn't as good as the original plot as well. And it's about these aliens coming from space, and basically it's basically a body snatching thing where they infect the people with these spores that go inside the body, infect them and control them, and they become subservient to the master plan to basically take over the world. They've got these big designed domes where the creature lives in that were actually designed by Quatermass for a moon mission to actually send people to the moon, and that'd be where they'd live. Instead of taking his design and made it for the monsters to live on Earth, because they can't survive on Earth. They have to survive through people. And they have to try and mutate the planet to be able to leave this thing. So it's a conspiracy plot. Quatermass has to figure out that people are infected in the government as well as on the location. He has to find a way to destroy the alien invasion while he's not been believed by anybody. It's an enjoyable plot. It's not as good as Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Get out straight away, it's not Invasion of the Body Snatchers level good. Dunleavy here is probably more fun in this one than he was in the first one, because he's more centre stage and he's actually got an enemy that's worth being grumpy to and worth yelling at. You have a young Sid James in this one as well as a reporter. You've got a fun bunch of people either being infected or being like locals who are working for the aliens, don't realise that they're just working on government contracts. And there's some nice stuff there about them being oblivious, but they're not actually infected. They're just like to keep their jobs. They're actually towing the company line. The way you see nowadays, and I've always seen like people can turn to politics to keep their jobs basically. So you have a lot of jokes about that as well. But eventually, once they realise the alien invasion, they form a mob to attack the aliens. There's lots of fun stuff here. It's just not as inventive as the original Quatermass Experiment. That's just it. It's well directed, well guessed. The writing by Nigel Neal was pretty good. But it's just the plot's not as inventive as his other plot. You know, it's probably the least of the plots of the Quatermass films, the least inventive of the plots. Anyway, it is still very enjoyable. It's still a solid film you can watch. It's like 80 minutes long. It gets in and gets out really quickly. It has some fun sequences, especially when the mob gets up and starts attacking. So it's an enjoyable film. It's a really enjoyable film, but it's not quite the same level as some of the other films. We'll go off Quatermass for a little bit now. Talk about the two films made running at the same time. Because Quatermass and Pit came in the 60s, even though the TV show was in the 50s, it took a long time to get the money to make Quatermass and the Pit. So it's a different director and different crew and everything else. So we'll go to Abominable Snowman, which was Nigel Neal written by Val Guest, who did the first two Quatermass films. This is a fun film. I like this more than Quatermass 2. There's not very many versions of the film. It's just SD at the moment in Britain, so it's very hard to get a decent copy of it. But it is based on the play they did before. In the play, in the TV show, and in the BBC, Stanley Baker played the villain, who I've just done a video on. On the film, it's Forrest Tucker, I think his name is, and he's the villain. He's an American guy coming in to going hunting Abominable Snowman in the Himalayas. Peter Cushing played the same part in both the film version and the TV version. And in the film version, he's got a wife and an assistant who come and rescue him at the end. And the TV version, apparently, those parts weren't there. And it is about a guy who's out to try and find out. He's a guy who's into plants. Cushing played a guy who's into plants, into cultures, trying to figure out other cultures, what they're about. But he was a climber, but he was injured. But this troop's up to find the Yeti and try and find what the reality of the myths are. And they've asked Cushing to go with them. And Cushing, even though he doesn't quite trust them, he wants to see what's going on because he's curious. He can't help himself. And so he goes up with them to the Himalayas to try and find. So he gets some nice climbing scenes as they go up. And then when they start dealing with the Yeti, they're getting taken down one by one. Different members of their party are getting taken off one by one. And you find out the different persons in the party and what their motivations are. So as a character-based thing, where you get an idea of who the leader is, who the villain is, and what he's about. And he's basically a showman. He wants to catch the Yeti to actually take it back down and actually show it off. And because he's been viewed as a fraud before, he wants to prove himself not a fraud. One of the other guys is guy who can do all the stuff. He's good with the guns, good with the hunting, and he's just a bit crazy, but entertaining with it. There's another guy who's seen a Yeti before, who's haunted by the experience, and who's obsessed. Even though he's not a good climber, he's obsessed by this image, and of course, he pays his life for it. And slowly but surely, these guys are knocked off, and you see them slowly go mad in the Himalayas and high altitude. This is a really enjoyable film. You kind of know they're getting knocked off one by one, but it is just because decent actors, decent characters, a good setting of up on the mountainside where you can't really escape and things are going wrong slowly but surely and people are going mad slowly but surely. All that stuff really works well. Cushing, of course, is terrific as the lead. He's always good in these kind of films, and he plays it with the proper gravitas to actually get the points across for the character that, what's going on. He takes it seriously, so you believe in the Yeti because he believes in the Yeti, of his possible existence. Like, he's the most valuable player in this film because he's the one who grounds it all the time. And it's a well-directed film. There's some nice points made, the idea the Yeti are actually just an offspring of evolution. They're just trying to hide out because of mankind are basically dicks. That's basically, that's not the language used, but it's basically, mankind are dicks, we're going to wait for them all to die, then we'll come down off the mountain. So there's a nice element of, we're the villain, not them, we're the villain. Or greed's the villain. So it's a well-made film, it's very enjoyable, and it does feel very tied to those Quatermass films. With just the theme of man's greed and man's insanity, and science out of control, and people's need for information out of control. And just general mankind are grumpy and difficult. Now we have X the Unknown, which sounds like a Quatermass film, but it's not. But they want to use a Quatermass character in the film, but Nigel Neal said, no, you can't. This is stupid. This film's stupid, basically. Because it is. It's a stupid film. It's about a creature that comes from molten lava that comes up and burns people and destroys their bodies because it's been it comes up through these fissures and it's a stupid film. It's a really stupid film, but it's very enjoyable. It's really enjoyable. The monster doesn't quite make sense, and they don't have the effects to pull it off. And the A to B to C, the plot, doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's enjoyably atmospheric. Now, originally, Joseph Losey started it, but him and Dean Jagger, the actor, either Losey fell ill, which feels like the PR version of events, or Jagger, who was the American star that pulled in to this Hammer production, was anti-communist, and Losey was in the blacklist, so he said, we can't work with this guy. We need rid of him. So Losey shot a couple of days, I think. A lot of the exteriors, it seems. And you can tell because they look like Losey shots. I mean, the best stuff in the film is the exterior stuff, when you've got lots of people going through the landscapes, and it feels very much like a Losey film. Losey was very good at visuals, and black and white visuals, or people popping in and out of areas in interesting ways, people going through the landscape in interesting ways. All the atmospheric stuff is terrific. It's so well shot. And then you get to the other scenes, the interior scenes, some of the other, certain exterior scenes, but mostly the interior scenes that feel like they're shot by someone who just pointed a camera vaguely. And those are the scenes with the worst dialogue as well, because the scenes where you're shot outside that are well directed, the acting's good, and then the scenes inside where the acting's terrible, and it's like it's a different director. Leslie Norman directed this stuff, and it's pretty naff, but enjoyable in a B-movie way. But it's not that good. You know, this is easily the worst film out of the bunch I'm covering, but it's still very enjoyable. It may be stupid, but it is enjoyable. I had a whale of a time watching this film, but not always for the right reasons, not for the reasons it intended. You get an early young Michael Ripper in this one, getting quite a lot to do as the kind of one of the sergeants in charge of the soldiers who find the thing, and has to keep on coming back to help them out, and he's probably quite happy to get some decent stuff, you know. And that's kind of the Hammer connection, really. But this is one of the ones they made that was like, one of the things is like, you're not that good at science fiction. You need someone to come in and do the science fiction for you. This is not good. This makes no sense. And it's just daft. It's like one of those things that someone has read something in science thing and they've misunderstood the science involved and made this weird plot. And apparently it was Jimmy Sangster who wrote this. This is the outline he wrote, and it got him into writing for Hammer. But it's a daft plot. It's really stupid. And it doesn't make any sense, but it's still an enjoyable film. But back to Quatermass now, after these two weirder ones. So we have Quatermass and the Pit, which is the high mark of the TV show and the film series. We have a new director with colour, with Roy Ward Baker as the director. It's shot in colour. They actually got a decent location for once, because they had an area where they could afford to hire out for various technical reasons. I can't quite remember the details, but they actually had a bigger soundstage than normal, which they could take advantage of to do these street shots and these like crazy shots towards the end as everything goes wrong. So it looks more high budget than Hammer normally does. And you've Roy Ward Baker, who did Night to Remember, and who was a classy director, who then went and did some of the tawdrier Hammer films, like, you know, just the kind of Countess Dracula stuff, and you know, it was not Scars of Dracula. I mean, films I enjoy, but they're not good films. But I do enjoy them. But it's like it's not the highlight of anyone's career doing some of these films. But this one is one of the classic Hammer films. This is really good stuff, really good material. Nigel Kneale adapted it himself, so he cut it down in an intelligent way. So it's a story of a ship is found, a spaceship is found underground, as well as bones of these creatures that predate man. And there's a crashed ship just below a subway which is getting renovated. They're trying to work out what it is and what does it all mean. Quatermass is nearby, and he's pulled into it, and he has to try and figure out what's going on as people get more and more paranoid, because the army's there and they think it's a Nazi bomb, which makes no sense to Quatermass and makes no sense to anyone else. But it's a kind of, it's an idea of it's a stupidity of people who want an easy explanation for something that's complicated because they don't want to think about it too much. They don't want to think about the implications of something, so they'll lie basically to hide what's obviously going on. So Julian Glover plays the guy who's doing all that stuff. He's the guy who will not listen to science because he's a military man. He does not want to deal with that. And he's into like tactical missiles and things like that. And he's not into all this, you know, science stuff is about where we all came from. Quatermass says, and Quatermass speaks to another scientist who's a who's interested in where we came from, and he's actually investigating all the skulls. And they work together. Now, Andrew here plays Quatermass. He's wonderful as Quatermass. He's got everything down perfect. He's kind, but he's also the person in authority, naturally in authority. So you always feel he's in charge even when he's not in charge. And he's observant and he understands what the stakes are at all times. So he's a good central performance for the film. You know, you've got a bunch of other Hammer stalwarts all around him as well. It works really well. The casting's terrific. You've just got just wonderful actors, and you've also got a great idea, which is mankind was manipulated by Martians millions of years ago when they realised their planet was dying, and a lot of the Martian genes came into mankind, all its bad habits like the territoriality, the tribalism, all the kind of things that we don't like about ourselves came from this infection, these brain surgeries that happened millions of years ago as they created mankind to evolve beyond monkeys. But basically we are the Martians. We are their bloodline, ultimately, because they manipulated their brain cells to evolve in a certain way. And the ship can actually manipulate our brain cells to actually react like Martians and become tribal. And the idea is what's in mankind that makes it so horrible, so brutal, so vicious. And this came well before 2001. 2001 shares a lot of some of the similar themes as like, what are we? How did we evolve beyond the apes? So they take this idea of the Martians, but it's just based on this idea of what's in us that can be manipulated into these horrors of World War One and World War Two. What's in us that's so horrible that we have to always be on guard for. And the TV show, Quatermass has a speech at the end saying, we are the Martians and we have to be careful about what we do because we have these instincts that are horrific. In the film, you just show it. Basically, it's like you're seeing them in tribal, you're seeing human beings in tribal, you're seeing us attack people who are not of a tribe, because there's certain people who do not have that trait in them, that they come from a line that actually isn't manipulated by the Martian mindset, and they're the ones that get hunted down once the signal comes out. The signal's going through TV, so it's going all over the world. So it's a really dangerous situation. But that's a wonderful thing. It gets into ideas like haunted places, like how things are haunted by Hobbs Lane. There's the sign of the devil, and Martians are similar to the devil imagery as well. So the idea of this ingrained image of the horned beast has been in us for millions of years because of they were our creators. We have to evolve beyond the devilish instincts. So the idea is that the devil is our predecessors that we have to evolve beyond. So it's not just the science stuff, it's actually the idea of myth and the stories we tell about ourselves as well as part of the conditioning we actually have from this manipulation. So there's tons of ideas, lots of stuff going on. There's some terrific sequences throughout, all done in a fairly low budget. You can tell there's certain things they have that probably wish they'd more money for, but the ideas are so good that ultimately you don't care because the acting's good, the atmosphere's terrific. When everything goes wrong, it looks good. When the riots happen, it looks really good, and it's just a wonderful film. Quatermass the Pit is just like one of the high bars of Hammer. It's just so good. Finally, we have the Quatermass Conclusion, which is the Euston Films ITV production. It was meant to be a BBC production. Then there was budget issues and Nigel Neal fell out of the BBC. So it came over to the ITV when Nigel Neal was doing stuff for them. And they decided they actually could budget this more ambitious film if they made a film for foreign territories and made a TV show for Britain. So now you can get both versions on a Blu-ray pack. We can get the television version or the shorter film version. I've seen both, but I have not watched the TV version for years. But I watched the film version for this video. And Nigel Neal said something that was probably accurate. He goes, the TV version's too long and the film version's too short. And that feels fair, ultimately, because the TV version does feel like it drags its feet. And the film version does feel like you're missing bits. Like you're jumping from A to B to C. It does have a more propulsive narrative, but you feel there's gaps in narrative that you needed more for. It does feel like you could have had another 20 minutes in the film running time just to help it out. I mean, Piers Haggard directed both. He directed all the material and he put them together as the film version and the TV version. It's well directed generally. There are some sequences you think this could have been better, but I think they were going on a limited budget. Even though they had more money than before, it was still a certain budget. So and plus it's the late 70s. There's only so much you can do with that technology at the time. So I'm not going to be too brutal about it, but I think there's certain bits of direction could have been better. Like Nigel Neal had some issues with direction as well. He said there were certain things that he was prodding at the flower people, but he also said some of the characters should be more like punks as well. The idea of that whole idea is the world is falling apart. People have become either violent or basically flower people. Either they're going to this area to worship all these different stones and different areas like Stonehenge, or they're becoming violent people fighting each other in different tribes. Basically, it's a sequel to Quatermass in the Pit, where things have not got better. People have fallen back into their tribal ways, and the youth have got sick of it. And the idea is that there's a alien harvester, this alien creature that's actually just like a mechanism now. It's not alive. It's just like, this is what it does. It goes from planet to planet and actually sends signals that manipulates the people to be more violent and be then submissive to try and come to these places, and it just feeds off the people in these spots that the people have been drawn to subconsciously. And the actual Stonehenge things are all markers of places that are dangerous. So they're not places that are, it's like the warning signals, do not go to these places. But of course people now, because years later that message has been lost, they go to those places because they think they're going to God, when actually they're going to their massacre. And it starts off with the young, but as people get older, even people who are like parents start to get tied into that idea, because they've lost all hope on how the world's going, and they're looking for something. And if they've got a kind of ideology that goes towards that, they can easily be affected. So the people who have to try and find a way out of it is the older folk, because they are less affected by it. Which Nigel Neal thought was a funny idea, but a lot of people thought it was him saying all the youth are stupid and listen to the old. He just said, nah, it was just a funny idea. He just thought it was amusing. It wasn't really a big deal. It was just, it fit in with what he was doing. But it is a really good idea. It feels a lot like the monsters in this one, this thing from space that's coming down, has been blown up in space. It's similar to the monsters in Quatermass 2, which has also had a signal ship in space that had to blow up. So that thing has been recycled. But everything else is different, and it's much more interesting than Quatermass 2. And there's lots of fun ideas, and the characters are enjoyable. I mean, John Mills plays Quatermass in this one. He's okay. He's not the best Quatermass. He's not like Andrew Morell or Andrew Keir. Like Nigel Neal wasn't so keen on him because he didn't bring the authority, he said. But I quite liked him as Quatermass. Simon McCorkindale plays Joe, who's another scientist who helps Quatermass and has his family killed halfway through the story, and he's like just out to destroy this thing. This second half, I think he's good in this as well. Nigel Neal didn't like him. Nigel Neal liked to complain a lot about some of these actors. It's just the way it goes. I thought he was fine. It's very enjoyable. There's a mood that really worked. There's a mood to them. There's a point where everyone in Wembley Stadium, all these people at Wembley Stadium and Wembley, because it's a place of lots of it's a football stadium, but also is viewed as a kind of cultural sacrifice area where A lot of people are killed there and there's just dust everywhere. It's a wonderful sequence. So there's lots of really cool stuff in there. It's just that there's certain bits of action that seem a bit low budget, that they don't have money for it, and it does feel like it's been cut down too much in the film version. There's gaps where they go from A to B and you think, I've probably missed 20 minutes of footage here. It just feels like there's certain gaps at times. But it's still an interesting film. It's still definitely worth seeing. And it's a decent conclusion because Quatermass does die at the end to save the Earth. He blows them up. He blows up the aliens and dies to do it. And that's a fit conclusion. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's quite long. But all the Quatermass films are worth seeing. But especially Quatermass in the Pit and the Quatermass Experiment. Those are the two films you really should see. You know, especially the Pit one. Quatermass in the Pit is the best one. But Experiment's really good too. The other two are good. I mean, I'd go in order: Quatermass in the Pit, Experiment, Conclusion, and the weakest is probably Quatermass 2. But they're all enjoyable. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I've inspired you to go and watch these films, plus the other two, Abominable, Snowman and X Unknown, even though it's the crazy one. It's the one to watch while you're from drinking, really. So I'll be back soon with some more. So I'll see you later. Bye.